What's up guys, it's Zero here. Today we're talking about Dead Space and Dead Space's future. Let's get into it. So guys, Dead Space is one of the greatest horror games of all time. Obviously up to this point we've had the trilogy and then we've had a Dead Space remake which I thought was outstanding from Team Motive. And obviously, there's been a lot of question marks as to, is the Dead Space franchise going to continue after the success of the Dead Space remake? Obviously, a Dead Space spiritual successor was the Callisto Protocol, which obviously came out probably at the wrong time. You know, when we think about games that came out around the same time as a game similar in that franchise, the Callisto Protocol and the Dead Space remake came out at, kind of very similar times. And I think that what was the Callisto Protocol, I loved it for what it was. I thought it was a great, beginning to what I was hoping to be a long-withstanding franchise. That franchise or, game kind of got put to a screeching halt when obviously it had a number of issues at launch and it didn't sell as well and all of those things. But Dead Space is a bigger question because the remake did really well. Is Motive going to continue this franchise into the future? Let's talk about it. So guys, in an article coming to us from Stephen Garand of Scream Rant, the Dead Space franchise has been a pillar of the horror gaming genre since its release in 2008. Praised for its haunting atmosphere and unique combat mechanics, even though the third entry in the franchise wasn't met with the same critical acclaim as the previous two, the franchise is still widely beloved to this day, proven by the success of the recent remaster. While the 2023 Dead Space remaster wasn't a perfect adaptation, it did an excellent job bringing the classic sci-fi horror experience up to modern standards with revolutionized visuals and enhanced gameplay. And so, at least for me, with, in terms of playing all of the Dead Space games up to this point in time, the first two were incredible. I still think that Dead Space 2 is my favorite out of the entire franchise. Dead Space 3, I feel that they focus too much on action over horror, whereas the other couple of titles, that being Dead Space 1 and 2, was more horror over action. And so when we got to the Dead Space remaster, I felt like it was kind of taking us back to the roots of what Dead Space was all about. Instead of trying to chase trends, they went back to what worked for the franchise, and I absolutely loved the remaster. I thought it was incredible, and I thought, hey, you know what? We could potentially, because of this remaster, could get further remasters for like Dead Space 2 and things of that nature, and maybe even lead us into Dead Space 4. Well, while the Dead Space remaster was somewhat of a surprise, given a decade without any updates or a sequel to the Grimm series, it was more than welcome. Thanks to the improvements made in the remaster, Dead Space is more accessible than ever, with a new generation of players getting to experience it, outperforming the originals while receiving nearly the same critical acclaim. Despite the apparent success of the newest entry in the series, it seems that hope for a sequel to the Dead Space franchise is grim at best, based on a recent statement from the developers. So, obviously, guys, in an interview with Dan Allen Gaming on YouTube, the original creators of the legendary Dead Space franchise discussed their interest in creating a sequel after the release of the original Dead Space remaster. Despite the massively renewed interest in the franchise, EA declined the pitches presented by the developers for the long-awaited Dead Space 4 this year and has no plans to license it out at the moment. So, with EA, guys, it's another classic kind of situation where you have this big publisher that wants to kind of focus on other titles like their juggernaut franchises like Battlefield and things of that nature, Star Wars, instead of focusing on, yes, Dead Space, when you think of it compared to Battlefield, is not nearly as big of a franchise, but at the same time, this is still a very popular franchise that sells well, gets really good reviews overall, obviously outside of the third game. And, I feel that for them not to license this thing out doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you license this out, find a really good, passionate team that can work on the continuation of this beloved franchise? While it makes sense that EA would not give out the license if they plan to release more remakes, the complete lack of interest in a sequel was shocking given the remaster's success. Even though this news is fairly heartbreaking for fans hoping to see a true revival of the sci-fi horror franchise, there's still hope that more remasters for Dead Space 2 and even Dead Space 3 could make their way into players' hands in the future. On top of this, the developers mentioned they are working on some exciting upcoming projects that fans will want to keep an eye out for, and they are still open to the prospect of another Dead Space project if the opportunity arises. While there's still a demand for single-player experiences in the current gaming landscape, they lack the unending stream of microtransactions offered by live service experiences. Since games like FIFA generate millions of dollars in a single day, it's understandable why Electronic Arts heads would focus on their current cash cows or remasters rather than taking a chance with an entirely new single-player game. Even though this still leaves hope for a Dead Space 2 remaster, the upcoming Battlefield may have killed it for the time being, as the team behind the project is focusing on the next release in the controversial multiplayer franchise currently. So, from a business perspective, it makes sense that EA is working, like I said, on Battlefield, Star Wars, they're big juggernauts. FIFA, of course, is generating a lot. So yeah, Dead Space isn't going to be that cash cow. Could it be? Of course. I mean, I feel that Dead Space, you have the makings of something really great. Yes, it's a single player story, but could you add more co-op modes? Like a horde mode similar to Gears of War, where you're going up against waves and waves of enemies, either alone or with your friends. Could you do multiplayer in some capacity? I believe you absolutely could. I think you could expand upon the scope of Dead Space as a whole. I really do. Some things will work, some things won't, but you just need to, continue to figure those things out to really engage this fan base of this beloved franchise. And so, do I think that there will be more Dead Space titles in the future? I think there will be. I do think that EA, if they're not planning on touching it, license it out to another company who's passionate about it to create this, continuation or even just remasters of Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 3, see what the, response is to those, and then go from there. But I really I've been pounding the table for years about a Dead Space 4, why we want to see this franchise continue. And there's certainly ways, guys, that you can continue to open this up to a bigger and bigger audience of people coming in. Obviously, the remaster did a number of those things, bringing in more and more people. But I really feel that if you added more co-op modes, like a horde mode, multiplayer modes, you think that you couldn't do like multiplayer with this? I mean, all the different kinds of, awesome suits that you could come up with and the different microtransactions, earnable items and payable items. I think Dead Space is primed for something like this. But like I said, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts about this in the comment section down below. It's not all doom and gloom for the Dead Space franchise. The remaster still provides players with an experience that rivals and in some way improves the series by offering big changes while staying true to the original horror experience. It's hard to forget the disastrous release of the Callisto Protocol in 2022, which was intended to be a spiritual successor to Dead Space, even made by some of the original developers. Electronic Arts likely doesn't feel the need to bear the financial risk of a similar reaction from players compared to its consistently successful projects. The potential remasters are likely the best thing fans will get from a new Dead Space experience for a long time. Unfortunately, I agree with that. But I think now that they're kind of putting Dead Space on the back burner once again, this would be the time to release like a Callisto Protocol or something that's a spiritual successor to Dead Space, because there's a need, there's a want for it. See, when Callisto Protocol comes out, Dead Space, I mean, it came out like what, the following year. And so I just think like, if we're not going to get another Dead Space, man, if you were able to do, obviously a Callisto Protocol 2 is more than likely definitely not happening. But if you could come up with something that's still a spiritual successor, there's a lot of people in the Dead Space community that would absolutely check it out. But once again, guys, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts about this in the comment section down below. Do you think that we'll ever get a Dead Space 4 or like a Dead Space 2 remaster, something of that nature? Let me know what you guys think about it in the comment section down below. And for more Dead Space content and videos, keep it right here.